Ronald Wright, the first of 5 lectures collectively titled A Short History of Progress. The Massey Lectures began in 1961, and they've had a profound effect on what we might call the national conversation in this country, what it is that makes us who we are, and what the issues are that face us, both as Canadians and as citizens of the world. This year, the Massey lecturer is novelist and archaeologist Ronald Wright. His books include the futuristic satirical novel A Scientific Romance and a number of highly popular books about the people who lived in the Americas before the Europeans arrived. Time Among the Maya, Cut Stones and Crossroads, and Stolen Continents. Tonight, from the Bell Theatre at Carleton University in Ottawa, Gauguin's Questions, the first in the 2004 Massey Lectures. Here's Ronald Wright.
It really is a great honor for me to be giving these lectures, and a great pleasure to kick them off here in Ottawa. And on Fawkes Night, I don't know how many people here know that it's Fawkes Night, but by a strange coincidence, it is the 399th anniversary to the day of the gunpowder treason plot against the Westminster Parliament, not the one over there, which actually we used to, in England, learn this little rhyme, remember, remember, the 5th of November, gunpowder treason plot. And I think it really is worth remembering now, because it tells us that the war on terror and the various manipulations of that have been with us for a very long time. So, the first hour, the first of the Massey Lectures, Gauguin's Questions. The French painter and writer Paul Gauguin, by most accounts mad, bad, and dangerous to know, suffered acutely from cosmological vertigo induced by the work of Darwin and other Victorian scientists. In the 1890s, Gauguin ran away from Paris, from family and a stockbroking career, to paint and to bed native girls in the tropics. Like many a troubled soul, he could not escape so easily from himself, despite great efforts to do so with the help of drink and opium. At the bottom of his disquiet lay a longing to find what he called the savage, primordial man and woman, humanity in the raw, the elusive essence of our kind. This quest eventually drew him to Tahiti and other South Sea islands, where traces of a pre-contact world, an unfallen world in his eyes, lingered beneath the cross and tricolour. In 1897, after he'd been there quite a long time, a mail steamer docked at Tahiti, bringing terrible news. Gauguin's favorite child, Aline, had died suddenly from pneumonia. After months of illness, poverty, and suicidal despair, the artist managed to harness his grief to produce a vast painting, more a mural in conception than a canvas, in which, like the Victorian age itself, he demanded new answers to the riddle of existence. He wrote the title boldly on the image, 3 childlike questions, simple yet profound. Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? The work is a sprawling panorama of enigmatic figures amid scenery that might be the groves of heathen Tahiti or an unruly Garden of Eden, worshippers or gods, cats, birds, a resting goat, a great idol, and a young human pair who, the artist wrote, dare to consider their destiny. Gauguin's third question, where are we going, is what I want to address in these talks. It may seem unanswerable. Who can foretell the human course through time? But I think we can answer it in broad strokes by answering the other two questions first. If we see clearly what we are and what we've done, we can recognize human behaviors that persist through many times and cultures. And knowing these can tell us what we are likely to do and where we are likely to go from here. Our civilization, which subsumes most of its predecessors, is a great ship steaming at speed into the future. It travels faster, further, and more laden than any before. We may not be able to foresee every reef and hazard, but by reading her compass bearing and headway, by understanding her design, her safety record, and the abilities of her crew, we can, I think, plot a wise course between the narrows and bergs looming ahead. And I believe we must do this without delay, because there are too many shipwrecks behind us. The vessel we are now aboard is not merely the biggest of all time, it's also the only one left. The future of everything we've accomplished since our intelligence evolved will depend on the wisdom of our actions over the next few years. Like all creatures, humans have made their way in the world so far by trial and error. Unlike other creatures, we have a presence so colossal that error is a luxury we can no longer afford. The world has grown too small to forgive us any big mistakes. Despite certain events of the 20th century, most people in the Western cultural tradition still believe in the Victorian ideal of progress, a belief succinctly defined by the historian Sidney Pollard in 1968 as the assumption that a pattern of change exists in the history of mankind, that it consists of irreversible changes in one direction only, and that this direction is towards improvement. Our technological culture measures human progress by technology. The club is better than the fist, the arrow better than the club, the bullet better than the arrow. So we came to this belief for empirical reasons, because it delivered. Pollard notes that the idea of material progress is a very recent one, significant only in the past 300 years or so, coinciding with the rise of science and industry and the corresponding decline of traditional beliefs. We no longer give much thought to moral progress, a prime concern of earlier times, except to assume that it goes hand in hand with the material. Civilized people, we tend to think, not only smell better, but behave better than barbarians or savages. Well, this notion has trouble standing up in the court of history, and I shall return to it in the next lecture when considering what is meant by civilization. Our practical faith in progress has ramified and hardened into an ideology, a secular religion which, like the religions that progress has challenged, is blind to certain flaws in its credentials. Progress, therefore, has become myth in the anthropological sense. And by this I don't mean a belief that is flimsy or untrue. Successful myths are powerful and often partly true. As I've written elsewhere, myth is an arrangement of the past, whether real or imagined, in patterns that reinforce a culture's deepest values and aspirations. Myths are so fraught with meaning that we live and die by them. They are the maps by which cultures navigate through time. The myth of progress has sometimes served us well, those of us at the best tables anyway, and may continue to do so. But I shall argue in these talks that it's also become dangerous. Progress has an internal logic that can lead beyond reason to catastrophe. A seductive trail of successes may end in a trap. Take weapons, for example. Ever since the Chinese invented gunpowder, there has been great progress in the making of bangs, from the firecracker to the cannon, from the petard to the high explosive shell. And just when high explosives were reaching a state of perfection, progress found the infinitely bigger bang within the atom. But when the bang we can make can blow up our world, we've made rather too much progress. Several of the scientists who created the atomic bomb recognized this in the 1940s, telling politicians and others that the new weapons had to be destroyed. Albert Einstein wrote, "The unleashed power of the atom has changed everything save our modes of thinking, and we thus drift toward unparalleled catastrophes." And a few years later, President Kennedy said, "If mankind does not put an end to war, war will put an end to mankind." When I was a boy in the 1950s, the shadow of too much progress in weaponry of Hiroshima, Nagasaki, and a number of vaporized Pacific islands had already fallen over the world. It has now darkened our lives for about 60 years, and so much has been said on the subject that I needn't add more. My point here is that weapons technology was merely the first area of human progress to reach an impasse by threatening to destroy the planet on which it developed. At the time, this progress trap was seen as an aberration. In all other fields, including those of nuclear power and chemical pesticides, the general faith in progress was largely unshaken. Advertisements of the 1950s showed a smiling Mrs. 1970 who, having bought the right brand of vacuum cleaner, was enjoying the future in advance. Each year's motor car looked different from the previous years, especially if it wasn't. And peasants were freed from vermin with generous dustings of DDT in what became known as the Third World. So in both its capitalist and communist versions, the great promise of modernity was progress without limit and without end. The collapse of the Soviet Union led many to conclude that there was really only one way of progress after all. In 1992, Francis Fukuyama, a former U.S. State Department official, declared that capitalism and democracy were the end of history, not only its destination, but its goal. Doubters pointed out that capitalism and democracy are not necessarily bedfellows, citing Nazi Germany, modern China, and the worldwide archipelago of sweatshop tyrannies. Yet Fukuyama's naive triumphalism strengthened a belief, mainly on the political right, that those who have not chosen the true way forward should be made to do so for their own good, by force if necessary. In this respect, and in the self-interest it obscures, the current ideology of progress resembles the missionary projects of past empires, whether 7th century Islam, 16th century Spain, or 19th century Britain. Since the Cold War ended, we have held the nuclear genie at bay, but haven't begun to stuff it back in its bottle. Yet we're busy unleashing other powerful forces, cybernetics, biotechnology, nanotechnology, that we hope will be good tools, but whose consequences we cannot foresee. The most immediate threat, though, may be nothing more glamorous than our own waste. Like most problems with technology, pollution is a problem of scale. The biosphere might have been able to tolerate our dirty old friends coal and oil if we burned them gradually, but how long can it withstand a blaze of consumption so frenzied that the dark side of this planet glows like a fanned ember in the night of space?